My aunt handed me an old necklace on her deathbed. And with her final breath, she said, "Whatever happens, don't take it off." I thought it was just grief talking. But 2 weeks later, it cracked open. And inside was a hand-drawn map that led me straight to the house where my mother died. A death they called an accident. But the map told a different story. And once I followed it, I uncovered a secret my entire family had buried deep in the heart of New Orleans. One they were willing to kill for. Twice. I remember staring at the necklace in my hand long after the funeral ended. It was old, ornate, almost vintage, like something out of a New Orleans antique shop. The chain was delicate, the pendant shaped like a bird cage, with a single crimson stone in the center. My Aunt May had always worn it. Every Sunday dinner. Every holiday. Even when she was bedridden in the final months, it never left her neck. She called me in on her last night. The room smelled like chamomile and morphine. Her hand trembled as she unclasped it and placed it in my palm. "Whatever happens, Elena," she said, "don't take it off. Promise me." I laughed nervously, because what else do you do when your only living relative sounds like a movie script? "I promise," I said, trying not to cry. I didn't expect it to crack open. 2 weeks later, I was rushing through airport security when the pendant hit the side of the TSA tray and split down the center with a soft click. I gasped. Inside was a folded slip of yellowed paper, so tightly tucked I almost missed it. My fingers shook as I opened it. The ink was faded, but the handwriting was unmistakable. It was Aunt May's. There was only a rough sketch, what looked like an alleyway map with a red X marked behind a row of townhomes in New Orleans. Underneath it, one sentence, barely legible. "Your mother never slipped. They pushed her." I stood there frozen, heart racing, as a TSA agent tapped my shoulder and told me to keep moving. That night, I booked a one-way ticket to Louisiana. I didn't know what I was walking into. But I knew one thing for sure. That necklace wasn't a keepsake. It was a message. And whatever truth my aunt had buried, she'd made sure it would find me. I landed in New Orleans just after midnight. The air was thick, humid, alive, and humming like it remembered things people tried to forget. I rented a car that smelled like someone else's fear and drove straight to the French Quarter. I hadn't been back in over a decade. The last time I was here was for a funeral. My mother's. They said she slipped down a set of wet stairs behind a jazz bar. That she was drunk. Distracted. That she shouldn't have been there in the first place. I was 5. I don't remember the fall. But I remember the silence that followed it. Now I was back, with a hand-drawn map tucked into my jacket and a pulse in my ears I couldn't calm. The alley was exactly as the drawing showed, narrow, claustrophobic, half hidden between 2 abandoned brick buildings. Faded graffiti on the walls. A cracked mirror nailed to a wooden door. And at the far end, a rusted iron gate. The kind that kept things in. I found the X. It wasn't marked in paint or chalk like I expected, it was carved, deep into the brick, behind an old trash can. I reached around and felt the edge of something metallic, cold, square, taped to the wall. It was a small, rust-covered tin box, wrapped in black electrical tape and sealed shut with what looked like candle wax. I yanked it free and held it up. The weight was heavier than it should have been. Like whatever was inside had waited too long to be seen. I didn't open it there. Something told me this wasn't the place. Back in the hotel room, I cut the tape with a pocket knife and peeled back the lid. Inside were 5 things. A black and white photo of my mother standing next to a man I didn't recognize, both smiling nervously. A receipt for 2 bus tickets dated exactly 2 days before she died. A copy of a restraining order against my father. A newspaper clipping about an accidental fall from the jazz bar staircase. And a note, in my aunt's handwriting. She was going to leave. She had everything ready. Then she vanished. Start here, Elena. But don't trust anyone who tells you they loved her. Especially not the man who raised you. I dropped the note. My vision blurred. My father had always told me she was unstable. That she drank too much. That she loved me, but not enough to stay. Now I realized he was the only one telling that story. And I was finally holding the evidence that something far darker had happened. Not an accident. A cover-up. And the people responsible were still out there. I couldn't sleep that night. The box sat on the dresser like it was watching me. Like it had waited 20 years for someone to finally care. I kept staring at the photo. My mother's smile, faint but real. And the man beside her, young, well-dressed, a hint of concern behind his eyes. Who was he? The back of the photo had something scrawled in blue ink, smudged but still legible. April 3rd, after the appointment. He says we'll be safe. Safe. 2 words that didn't belong in the same sentence if my father was anywhere nearby. I grabbed my laptop, scanned the image, ran it through a reverse search tool, and waited. Nothing came up. But then I remembered something Aunt May used to say when she was 2 glasses deep in cheap red wine. Not everyone disappears. Some people are just buried under the wrong names. So I tried a different approach. I uploaded the photo to an old alumni group for the University of New Orleans, where my mother had studied journalism. An hour later, someone replied. Looks like Professor Julian Marks. Taught ethics. Got fired the same semester your mother died. Whole thing was weird. He just vanished. My chest tightened. The man next to my mother in that photo wasn't a boyfriend. He wasn't some random stranger. He was a professor. And based on the date written on the back, they met 2 days before her death, right after an appointment. I checked the receipt in the box again. The bus tickets were issued to L. Brooks and J. Marks. Destination, Baton Rouge. They were leaving together. But they never made it. I called the number on the alumni forum post and spoke to a woman named Clara, a retired staff member. Her voice was raspy, hesitant. Julian wasn't a bad man, she said. He just got involved in something bigger than he realized. When I asked if she knew where he was now, she paused. Try the old post office downtown. The one that's not a post office anymore. He used to meet someone there, always on Sundays. It was Tuesday. I had 5 days. But I wasn't going to wait. The next morning, I went back to the French Quarter and stood outside the shuttered post office, red brick, broken window, ivy curling along the doorway. I didn't know what I was looking for. Until I saw it. Scratched into the side of the metal mailbox, almost invisible unless the light hit it just right, were the initials. LB plus JM. Inside a heart. My mother never ran away. She tried to start over. With someone who loved her. And someone, maybe everyone, made sure she never got that chance. And if Julian Marks was still alive, I was going to find him. Even if it meant dragging the truth out of every dark corner this city had tried to forget. The old post office felt like a place frozen in time. The kind of building where ghosts don't haunt you. They just watch silently, waiting to be remembered. I circled it twice. No signs of life. Windows boarded, grass growing through the pavement cracks. And yet, something about it felt watched. I didn't go in. Instead, I left a note. Folded it twice. Slipped it behind the old mailbox door. If you're Julian Marks, I'm Lillian Brooks's daughter. I don't want headlines. I want answers. Meet me Sunday. Noon. Here. Then I left. The next 3 days were slow torture. I couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. My father called once, just to ask where I was. Said he'd heard from someone that I'd taken time off work. I said nothing, just hung up. He didn't call back. Sunday came with gray skies and wind. I stood outside the post office at 11:58, clutching the same photo from the tin box, now creased at every edge. By 12:07, I thought I'd been played. But at 12:11, a car pulled up. An old, silver Buick. Rust at the doors. The man who stepped out wore a brown coat and a weathered baseball cap pulled low. But I knew it was him. Same eyes. Same face, just heavier, older, like it had carried decades of silence. He didn't say his name. Didn't ask for mine. He just walked up and said, "You look like her. God help you." We sat in the front seat of his car. He smelled like tobacco and dust and coffee. He pulled out an envelope and laid it on the dash. "Your mother wasn't crazy," he said. "She wasn't unstable. She was smart. Brave. And they hated that." I asked him what happened. He closed his eyes, exhaled slowly. Then he told me that my mother had come to him with documents, internal reports from Brooks Industries. Proof they were dumping chemical waste into a wetland outside Baton Rouge. Proof that kids nearby had gotten sick. She wanted to go public. He offered to help. To protect her. They planned to leave the city, start fresh. But 2 nights before they left, someone broke into his apartment. They took the files. Beat him unconscious. When he woke up, she was gone. And by the next morning, she was dead. They told me to disappear. Or I'd be next. So I did. He slid the envelope across the dash. Inside was a photo, one I'd never seen. My mother, sitting at a cafe table. Her hand resting on a thick manila folder. Behind her, blurry in the background. My father. Watching. Not just in the same area. Staring. At her. Julian looked at me, eyes red. He didn't just lose her. He hunted her. I asked him why he'd kept silent this long. His hands trembled as he spoke. Because I was a coward. But your aunt wasn't. She kept digging even after I ran. And now you're here. Which means she found something I never could. I stepped out of that car a different person. Before, I was chasing shadows. Now, I had names. Faces. Motive. And maybe. Just maybe. I had evidence. I couldn't go back to the hotel that night. My head was spinning, but my instincts were clear. There was more. And whatever Aunt May had found. She hadn't given me all of it. Julian's last words kept ringing in my head. She kept digging after I ran. Back at the hotel, I dumped everything onto the bed, the necklace, the map, the tin box, every scrap I had. Then I noticed something I'd missed. Folded in the bottom of the tin box, tucked behind the bus receipt, was a small key. It was old, bronze, with a faded blue tag. On it, written in sharp, tight cursive. Unit 317, Canal and 3rd. My breath caught. That address, it was a storage facility. One Aunt May used to drive by every time she picked me up from school. I used to ask her why she always slowed down near it. She'd just smile and say, "Some places store more than stuff, baby. They store sins." Now I understood. The next morning, I drove to Canal and 3rd, heart hammering in my chest. The front office looked deserted, half the lights flickering, the front desk unmanned. A sign read, "Tenants only. Leave if you have no business here." I had business. I slipped through the gate and made my way down the concrete corridors, passing row after row of metal doors. Unit 317 was near the end. Quiet. Cold. Still. The key turned easier than I expected. And when I lifted the metal door, the smell hit me first. Old paper. Dust. Mold. And something sharper, like rust and time had conspired to preserve what was inside. There were boxes. Dozens of them. Each labeled in Aunt May's handwriting. Lillian, 1998 to 2003. Hospital records, confidential. Witness letters, do not open. Photos, originals only. I didn't know where to start. So I reached for the box marked photos. Inside were hundreds of prints, some I'd never seen. My mother at protests. My mother in boardrooms. My mother standing in front of the Brooks Industries headquarters with a sign that read, "You can't poison people in silence." But one photo stopped me cold. It was my father. In a dark suit. Shaking hands with a man whose face I'd only seen once, in a framed photo on the wall of his office. Congressman Ellis Harlan. A longtime donor. And my father's mentor. The back of the photo had one line in Aunt May's handwriting. The connection no one's talking about. This wasn't just about business. It wasn't just about my mother. This was about power. Cover-ups. And the man who helped bury the truth with a smile and a handshake. Then I opened one last folder, thin, almost empty, titled, "For Elena. Only when she's ready." Inside was a letter. From Aunt May. "If you're reading this, it means the necklace did its job. You were never meant to live in the shadows they built. You were meant to burn them down." I sat there, on the cold concrete floor, surrounded by her truth. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a daughter searching for a mother. I felt like a witness. Standing on top of a matchbox soaked in gasoline. And I was ready to light the first spark. I didn't leave the storage unit until sunrise. I scanned every page of Aunt May's files on my phone, backed them up on 3 encrypted drives, and sealed everything back the way I found it. Because if I was going to start a fire, I had to make sure the sparks didn't go out. Back at the hotel, I emailed copies of the files to a law firm my aunt had scribbled on the back of an old envelope, Harlan and Grant LLP, ask for Naomi. The name didn't mean anything to me. But 5 minutes after I hit send, I got a call. The woman on the other end had a voice like smooth gravel. Measured. Sharp. "Elena Brooks. I've been waiting for you to reach out." She said my aunt had prepared her years ago. Had paid to keep a retainer open. Had told her, one day, a girl with a birdcage necklace would walk into hell, and need a lawyer on the other side. Naomi told me the documents I sent were real. Powerful. Dangerous. "You just turned over a rock," she said. "And whatever's been hiding underneath it? It's coming out now." She advised I lay low. Let her handle the legal front. But I knew something she didn't. This wasn't going to be solved in a courtroom. That night, I returned to the hotel, exhausted, drained, and found the door to my room slightly ajar. I froze. Every nerve in my body screamed. I stepped back, pulled out my phone, opened the camera app quietly, and pushed the door with my foot. Nothing seemed out of place. Until I saw the bed. The tin box, the one from the alley, was sitting dead center on the comforter. I hadn't left it there. And taped to the lid was a note. Scrawled in bold, slanted letters. "Some boxes should stay buried." No signature. No threat. But the message was clear. Someone knew. Someone had followed me. And someone had just let me know. I wasn't hunting alone anymore. I was being hunted. I didn't call the police. I didn't scream. I grabbed my backpack, threw the drives and essentials inside, and walked out. Down the hall. Out the lobby. Into the dark morning of New Orleans. And I didn't look back. I checked into a small Airbnb under a fake name. Used cash. Disabled location on my phone. Set up cameras and backup alarms. Then I called Naomi. They know I found the storage unit. She was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Good. That means they're scared. Now let's make them desperate." I didn't sleep. Not because I couldn't. Because I refused to. Someone had been in my room. Touched the box. Left a note. That meant they were close enough to threaten me. But not brave enough to stop me. That's fear. And I decided to use it. At 3 a.m., I opened a private channel to Naomi. I sent her everything I had on the first connection Aunt May warned me about. Congressman Ellis Harlan. Mentor to my father. Former board advisor to Brooks Industries. And the man in the photo, smiling, shaking hands over poison. I told her I wanted to go public. Not with my face. Not with my name. Just the documents. Naomi hesitated. Once you light that fuse, she warned. You don't get to put it out. I don't want to put it out, I said. I want to blow up the lies. By noon, an investigative journalist in D.C. had the files. By 4 p.m., he called to verify. By 7 p.m., the story was published, anonymously sourced, fully documented. Former Brooks board member linked to illegal waste dumping in Louisiana wetlands. Within minutes, it was trending. And for the first time in my life, I watched the people who once controlled the narrative lose grip on it. I expected silence. Instead, I got a reaction. That night, as I sat in the corner of the Airbnb, laptop open, phone charging, pepper spray within reach, my burner phone rang. Blocked number. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, a text came through. Turn off the lights. Look out your window. I did. Parked across the street, a black SUV. Not running. Not marked. Just, waiting. Another text. He's not the only name in that file, Elena. My heart stopped. They weren't just watching. They had read the files. Which meant, the leak hadn't come from my end. I called Naomi. We've been breached, I said. Someone in your circle is feeding them. She didn't deny it. We'll tighten the chain. But Elena, whoever's leaking info. They're close to you. Not me. I hung up. And for the first time I realized. This wasn't just about the past. It was about the present. Someone I trusted was working both sides. But I wasn't done leaking names. And the next one on my list? Was the man who slept under the same roof as my mother. The night she died. Growing up, my father had one rule he never said out loud. But made sure I understood. Never ask about your mother. And never believe anything that doesn't come from me. I used to think that was grief. Now I knew it was control. The morning after the leak, he called. No greeting. No small talk. Just 5 words. You're digging too deep, Elena. I didn't say a word. You think this is justice? He hissed. You're going to destroy everything your mother cared about. That line broke me. Because what he didn't know is that I had her words. Her handwriting. Her truth. I went back to the storage unit that afternoon. Box by box, I dug deeper. And that's when I found it. A cassette tape. Labeled in Aunt May's slanted handwriting. June 4, 2003, kitchen. Hidden recorder. My hand shook pressing play. The tape was grainy, staticky. But the voices were clear. It was my mother. Crying. And my father, yelling. If you say a word to anyone, Lillian, I swear to God. You won't live to regret it. There was a crash. Then silence. Then her voice, broken, breathless. You already made sure I won't. I covered my mouth. Collapsed onto the floor. That wasn't just a fight. It was a confession. Buried on tape. Preserved by the only woman who had protected both of us until her final breath. I sent the recording to Naomi. She called me 30 seconds after receiving it. This changes everything. This isn't a family dispute anymore, Elena. This is felony evidence. Homicide. Threats. We're filing a motion with the DA today. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there. Feeling a familiar ache crack open again. But that night. Everything shifted. At 2:13 a.m., the fire alarms in the Airbnb exploded. I grabbed my bag, my laptop, my backup drives, and ran. Outside, flames licked the living room windows. The kitchen was already gone. I stood barefoot on the sidewalk, heart pounding, smoke stinging my eyes. And in the crowd of neighbors and strangers forming outside, I saw him. A man in a dark coat. Hands in his pockets. Watching. When our eyes met, he turned away and disappeared into the side street. The fire was ruled accidental. But I knew better. They weren't just watching anymore. They were striking. And if they thought burning the evidence would slow me down, they forgot one thing. I am my mother's daughter. And I don't burn. I rise. The firefighters said it was faulty wiring. Said these old houses light up like matchbooks. Said I was lucky I got out alive. But luck had nothing to do with it. I had packed everything, every document, every drive, every photo, into a go bag 2 nights earlier. Because something in my gut had already warned me. They wouldn't just try to stop me. They'd try to erase me. And now? I was done waiting for permission to finish what my mother started. I drove through the night, past Baton Rouge, toward the last place that still held pieces of her. My grandmother's old farmhouse. The one we abandoned after the funeral. Dust coated every surface. The curtains were stiff with time. But the attic? The attic was untouched. I climbed the creaky stairs, flashlight in hand, heart in my throat. The air smelled like cedar, old books, and memory. That's when I saw it. The porcelain doll. Faded burgundy dress. Glassy eyes. Still sitting upright on the corner shelf like it had been waiting for me all these years. I used to be terrified of it. I never touched it. Never moved it. But I remembered. My mother never let anyone throw it away. And once, when I asked why, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "Because one day, it might save you." I took the doll in both hands. Turned it over. Taped beneath the hollow porcelain base was a strip of cloth, and a tiny zipper sewn into the fabric. Inside it, folded tightly and wrapped in plastic. A letter. Yellowed. Handwritten. And addressed to me. For Elena, when the time is right. I sat down on the attic floor, knees to my chest, and began to read. The letter was dated 3 days before she died. She wrote about everything. How she discovered the dumping. How she planned to leave my father. How she tried to protect me, but realized the only way to save me was to disappear herself. She had written a full confession. Names. Dates. Bank accounts. Even receipts for the bribes paid to keep certain officials quiet. And at the end, she wrote, "If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. But I never stopped loving you. And I never wanted you to carry this weight. But now that you have it, don't let it sink you. Let it set you free." I cried. But not out of grief. Out of rage. For the little girl who grew up thinking her mother abandoned her. For the lies I was fed by the man who shared my DNA. And for the truth that had lived inside a porcelain doll. Longer than I had lived outside of it. I scanned the letter. Emailed it to Naomi. Backed it up 6 times. An hour later, she called me. Her voice tight, direct. "This is it. This is the document that buries them." And I knew. This was the strike they couldn't recover from. This wasn't just a paper trail. It was my mother's voice, rising from the silence. And now? It was my turn. To make them listen. The morning after I sent the letter to Naomi, I was expecting a subpoena to be issued. What I got was a wellness check. 2 officers. 1 clipboard. And a question that made my blood run cold. We received a call from a concerned relative. Said you've been exhibiting signs of paranoia. That you might be a danger to yourself, or others. I stared at them. For a second, I couldn't speak. Because I knew exactly what this was. This was the oldest move in the book. They couldn't discredit the evidence. So now, they'd try to discredit me. Just like they did to my mother. I kept my voice calm. Let them search the room. Showed them my ID. Told them I was consulting with an attorney and a journalist. They left. But not before one of them looked at me and said quietly, "If you're onto something real, you need to be careful. People get lost in the middle of stories like this." He wasn't threatening me. He was warning me. I called Naomi. "They're trying to paint me unstable. Exactly like they did with my mother." Naomi didn't sound surprised. "You're hitting them where it hurts. They're pulling every dirty trick they've got. But now we have more than documents, Elena. We have a timeline. We have a voice. And most importantly, we have a motive." She said the DA's office had agreed to open a formal criminal investigation. They were drafting subpoenas. One for my father. One for Congressman Harlan. And 3 more for people whose names I didn't recognize. Not yet. That night, I sat alone in a motel just outside Lafayette, lights off, curtains drawn. I stared at the recorder I kept in my hand, always on. Always rolling. Because if they ever came for me, I'd leave my own version of the truth behind. That's when the motel phone rang. No caller ID. I answered. A woman's voice. Flat. Cold. "Your mother cracked. You will too. And when you do, no one will believe a word you say." Click. I sat frozen, staring into the dark. And that's when I remembered something. A file Aunt May had labeled dismissed. At the time, I'd thought it referred to a lawsuit. But now I realized. It was the hospital record from my mother's mental health evaluation. The one that cleared her completely. The one that never made it into the official archive. Because someone made sure it got dismissed. I pulled up the scan. There it was. No psychiatric instability observed. No signs of self-harm, delusions, or paranoia. Patient is lucid, articulate, and emotionally sound. Signed by Dr. June Cartwright. Stamped and dated. 3 days before my mother fell down the stairs. I sent it to Naomi. Then to the DA. Then to the press. Because if they wanted to play the crazy woman card again, they better be ready to explain why the first one they tried it on had been certified sane right before she died. And why her daughter just proved it. The headline hit at 7:14 a.m. DA launches criminal probe into Brooks family and associates. Whistleblowers' documents raise allegations of fraud, corruption, and homicide cover-up. I stared at the screen, barely breathing. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was real. My mother's name. Not buried. Printed. In bold. For the first time in 2 decades, she wasn't the villain. She was the warning no one listened to. And now? They had no choice. By noon, Naomi called. "The subpoenas are signed. They're coming in for questioning your father, Ellis Harlan, and 3 others tied to the hospital board and the city zoning office." She paused. "And Elena, they're squirming. They've hired crisis teams, lawyers, PR. But none of it matters now. Because you didn't just give us documents. You gave us intent. You gave us voice. And you gave us motive with a timestamp." That afternoon, I received an email from the district attorney's office. Witness request. Voluntary testimony. For the upcoming federal case. I wasn't being hunted anymore. I was being called. I wore a plain navy dress. No makeup. Hair pulled back. In the hallway outside the courtroom, I saw him. My father. Sitting on the bench with 2 lawyers flanking him. Still in his favorite gray blazer. Still pretending like he owned the room. But when he looked up and saw me, he flinched. For the first time, he looked small. Not because I was taller. Not because I was stronger. But because I knew. And now, everyone else would too. Inside the courtroom, it was silent. The lights were harsh. The air thick with consequence. They swore me in. And then they asked, "Ms. Brooks, what made you start investigating your mother's death?" I didn't look at the DA. I looked at him. Because I stopped believing the story he told me. And I started reading the one she left behind. I laid out everything. The necklace, the storage unit, the doll, the documents, the letter, the tape. I didn't tremble. I didn't cry. I told the truth like it was armor. Because it was. And when I finished, the courtroom was silent again. Until the judge leaned forward and said, "We've heard enough from Ms. Brooks. Let's proceed with calling the accused." I stepped down. My father stood up. And in that moment, as our shoulders brushed, he whispered, "You'll regret this." I turned to him and smiled. "No. You will." The trial began 6 weeks later. It wasn't held in some small-town courtroom with peeling paint and whispered bias. It was federal. Public. Televised. And this time, they didn't get to hide behind sealed files or closed doors. The prosecution opened with the tape. My mother's voice trembling through the speakers. Followed by my father's, threatening, snarling. The room fell silent. Even the defense attorney didn't flinch. Because the truth was undeniable now. It had a voice. It had a timestamp. It had a daughter. Me. Ellis Harlan pled the fifth. The zoning officer cried on the stand. The hospital administrator tried to claim misfiled paperwork. But no one believed them anymore. The weight of 2 decades of silence was finally louder than every lie they'd rehearsed. When my father took the stand, he didn't even try to deny it. He tried something worse. He painted himself the victim. Talked about pressure, family shame, the burden of ambition. And when the prosecutor asked, "Did you kill your wife, Mr. Brooks?" he paused for a long time. Then said, "She wouldn't stop. She was going to ruin everything." The entire courtroom exhaled. The judge leaned forward. "Guilty. On all counts. Homicide. Obstruction. Coercion. Fraud. Conspiracy." As they cuffed him, he turned to look at me one last time. But I didn't meet his eyes. Because I wasn't there for him. I was there for her. For my mother. After the sentencing, I returned to the house in Vermont. The one my aunt left me. The one my mother never got to see finished. I walked to the back porch. Placed her doll on the swing. And opened the final letter I hadn't dared read. It wasn't full of facts or warnings. It was full of love. "If you made it this far, Elena, then I was right about you. You didn't just survive. You reclaimed our story. Tell it how it needs to be told. And then, live your own." So I did. I founded a nonprofit in her name. The Lillian Brooks Foundation. To protect women silenced inside their own homes. To teach daughters that silence is not strength. But truth, spoken clearly, is. And every year, on the day she died, I returned to the spot where they said she fell. Not to mourn. But to stand. Straight-backed. Eyes forward. Because she didn't fall. They pushed her. And I made sure the world finally knew it. Clapperboard, closing line, call to emotion plus life lesson. Some people bury the truth and call it peace. But peace never comes from silence. It comes when someone, somewhere, finally decides to stand up and speak. I was her voice. And now, you get to be yours.
If this story resonated with you, leave a comment. Tell us, have you ever had to heal without an apology? And what gave you the strength to keep going anyway? Speech balloon, you never know. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Bell, like, subscribe, and share if you believe in turning pain into power. And remember, your story isn't over. It's just beginning.